Welcome to Nice and Blunt. I'm Adam Riancho, and these are my running back rankings for week 2. On a positive note, there were no new injuries this week. Nobody has been ruled out after week 1 game action. So only Joe Mixon, Quinshon Judkins, and Tyjae Spears are unranked in this video. So let's begin. At number 1, I have Christian McCaffrey of the San Francisco 49ers at New Orleans on Sunday. He's my RB1 this week. I think it's pretty clear. Even though you were probably scared shitless when he had the questionable tag last week, he did play. He was phenomenal, and he's locked into top 5 production. He had 31 touches, and 10 of them were targets, 9 catches. That is elite. 142 total yards and no touchdown against Seattle. A very good defense. So he's going to be phenomenal as long as he remains healthy. That is the key. He's healthy for week 2, so I will start him as the top option. The volume is just too high. He did not score a touchdown. I would expect that to change pretty fast. At number 2, I have Bijan Robinson at the Vikings, who gets a primetime game on Sunday night this week. And Bijan looked unguardable. 50-yard touchdown just to break open the game against Tampa last week. He did split a lot of his touches in the run game with Algier. That's not ideal, but he did not split any of the usage in the passing game. He had all 7 targets out of the backfield, 6 catches for 100 receiving yards. That gets rid of any of the worries. The run game usage will come back to him. But this week he gets the Vikings, and they had a very good run defense last year, a bottom 3 matchup on the season in 2024, and they did kind of limit DeAndre Swift pretty well again. So maybe that's not a good matchup against the run. In the passing game, though, Bijan is locked into elite usage. Bijan's a stud, exactly as advertised when we drafted him, top 3. Next up, I got Derrick Henry versus Cleveland, and expecting a slow start for him was a bad call, but that's what it was the previous 4 years. So in the back of my mind, I kind of feel like maybe week 2 is a spot to slow play him and give him some rest coming off of a big week 1. But against the Browns at home, off the loss, you know they're going to really dominate, and odds are he will get in on this scoring frenzy very early. Maybe there is some garbage time available for Justice Hill and Keaton Mitchell, but not enough to lower Derrick Henry in the rankings. He proved he can maybe put up a better season than even last year. After week 1, he's locked into the top 5. So even if he does actually get some rest, it's not enough to bench him. He's a must start every week. Number 4, I'm going to hold strong with Jahmyr Gibbs versus Chicago this week. Last week was bad, only 10 points. However, when you look more closely at the usage, I think the main takeaway is that the Packers are a really tough matchup, not that Gibbs is not a good option anymore. Gibbs absolutely let you down, but I think it's a perfect buy low opportunity because while yes, he only ran for 19 yards on 9 rush attempts, 2.1 yards per carry is really bad. He also had 10 targets, caught all 10 of them for 31 receiving yards. So in general, I just think the Packers' run defense was very good at stopping their opponents. And I think in a better matchup against Chicago, they will look a lot better. Off the embarrassing loss in the home opener this week, the Lions should bounce back, and they probably reassert their identity as a run-first team. Jared Goff didn't look that good without Ben Johnson. So the Bears were pretty vulnerable against Jordan Mason and Aaron Jones last week. I would expect Gibbs to have a very big bounce back. He's still a top 5 running back. He's still elite. Love the 10 target, 9 catch usage. In PPR, that's amazing. Number 5, though, this week would be Saquon Barkley at the Kansas City Chiefs. And he did not look amazing week 1 against the Cowboys. He had 16.4 half PPR points with a touchdown, only 84 total yards on 22 total touches, and 3.3 yards per carry is nothing special. So I'm not that excited about Saquon's debut performance, but he did prove you cannot fade him. The touchdown will repeat pretty much every single week. So in this offense, you cannot bench Saquon. But the reason he's at the bottom of this tier is because of the matchup versus Kansas City. Last year, they were the toughest matchup for all opposing fantasy running backs that you could ask for. And they did limit the Chargers to only 8.6 total points on 3.3 yards per carry in week 1. So I'm just a little bit hesitant to fully endorse Saquon with his best game of the season. Even if we go back to the Super Bowl game in that matchup as well, he was pretty limited. Only 2.2 yards per carry, 97 total yards, but on 31 total touches, 6 receptions, 97 yards, no touchdown, only put him at 12.7 points last time he faced the Chiefs. So while yes, you cannot bench him, I am expecting a slightly diminished return on investment. Saquon's probably not the RB1 in week 2 at the Chiefs. Next up, though, we are dropping down a tier. These are still top 10, top 12 running backs. You cannot bench any of them in this class. But at number 6, I have Josh Jacobs versus Washington. The Lions defense was very tough against the run last year, and it showed up again. Jacobs only had 3.5 yards per carry, but he did get 20 touches and still managed 70 total yards, 1 reception, and a touchdown in week 1. So that represents his floor, in my opinion. 13.5 points, I think, is kind of the worst case scenario. As long as he scores a touchdown, he's not going to get much worse than that moving forward. So I like the matchup here against Washington. It's not a heavy fade. Although they limited the Commanders, the game script never really benefit running the ball against Washington last week. So I think the Packers are going to look perfectly fine. I don't have any concerns. Jacobs, I think, is one of the safest plays all year, and his job near the goal line is unquestioned. It's not going anywhere. Jacobs is locked in to the top 10 every week. Another player I think is locked into the top 10 every week after week 1 would be Chase Brown. The Browns defense did give the Bengals a difficult time on offense. Nobody looked good overall. However, Chase Brown still had a very decent fantasy day, only 51 total yards, but did score a touchdown and also had 23 total touches. Was very dominant. He didn't really split the backfield with anyone. Only Samaje Perine got the ball at all, and it was only 2 targets out of the backfield. Taj Brooks was basically a healthy scratch, didn't see a single touch in that game. So the volume for Chase Brown is unquestioned. That's really the only takeaway I need in order to trust Brown all season. He might see 85% plus of the Bengals' touches this season. As long as he stays healthy, he's a lock in the top 10. There's going to be plenty of touchdowns all season in Cincinnati. So like this matchup versus Jacksonville, I think Chase Brown is a stud this week. Definitely a must start moving forward. At number 8, I have Bucky Irving at Houston, and he's also locked in the top 10 in my opinion. Bucky was ineffective in terms of efficiency, just like some other players I just mentioned. But he did catch all 4 of his targets. He turned one of those catches into a touchdown, and despite only 45 total yards, kept the floor at 12.5 points, which was top 20 on the week at the position. So I'm not worried. That's definitely the floor moving forward. Top 20 guaranteed. And top 10, based on volume alone, is the expectation. It's a high-scoring offense, and Bucky's role is not going anywhere. Rachaad White only had 3 total touches. Bucky had 18. So the snap share touch split was the only question mark entering year 2 for Bucky. His talent is definitely on display. I trust Bucky every single week. At number 9, I got James Cook at the Jets. He's the clear RB1. Ray Davis and Ty Johnson did not contribute very much. They only had 6 total opportunities combined. Meanwhile, James Cook had 18 touches. He caught all 5 of his targets, had 102 total yards and a touchdown. 18.7 points in half PPR, was top 5 in week 1. So love the upside for James Cook any given week. A little touchdown dependent sometimes, but the yardage total, 102 yards, was definitely keeping him afloat. There's a chance I'm ranking him too low here at number 9. He's locked into your lineup moving forward. You cannot bench him. And in his last 2 games versus the Jets, he also has 2 touchdowns. He's one of the safest plays you can find. At number 10, Kyren Williams, I think, gets locked into the top 12 moving forward. He really proved why he's still a great play in fantasy. Had a very tough matchup versus Houston. He was not efficient. 19 touches for only 69 total yards. But Jarquez Hunter didn't see a single touch. Blake Corum only had 2 touches, and Kyren Williams still found the end zone. He still went over 13 fantasy points against the Texans. That's pretty impressive. So touchdowns are safe to bet on. The Rams offense is elite. Kyren is unbenchable at RB10 in week 2. You have to start him. At number 11, you also have to start Jonathan Taylor versus Denver if you have him. The Colts dominated versus the Dolphins. So late in the game, they did lean on the backup DJ Giddens to close it out. Giddens had 12 carries, and you don't like to see that, especially in week 1. Not ideal. But Taylor still had 21 total touches, 18 rush attempts, 3 targets, 3 catches, and had 98 total yards, but did not find the end zone. He got vultured both times by Daniel Jones. So that was the problem for him last year with Anthony Richardson. It's still relevant, not ideal, but based on the overall production and volume, there's no way you're fading Jonathan Taylor. He's still a lock in your lineup. Guaranteed top 20 production every week, even without a touchdown. You're getting 10 points minimum from Taylor. When the touchdowns do arrive, you're going to be very pissed if you bench him. So locked in your lineup, there's no way you can fade him. And then at number 12, I think DeVon Achane is sadly also locked into your lineup. There's a lot of red flags here. I did not feel encouraged by the week 1 usage. Only 10 total touches, 7 on the ground, 4 targets, 3 catches, but was hyper efficient. As always, had 75 total yards, also a garbage time touchdown, carried you over the line. 15 fantasy points is valuable, but very touchdown dependent. Without it, he only had 9 half PPR points, and that's a big red flag. So the Dolphins look like they quit immediately, and obviously the injury concern is still somewhat lurking for Achane. He was banged up in the preseason. And then there's always the threat that Tua goes down as well. But for now, it looks like Mike McDaniel will continue to lean on the running back. Ollie Gordon was an afterthought, and Jalen Wright is still injured. So this offense was terrible. The only bright spot last week was Achane, and that's what's going to keep him in the must-start territory. He's at number 12. I think some of my preseason concerns were legit. He's still very talented, but the offense is a concern in Miami. Next up, we are dropping down a tier, but inside the top 20, I think these are the must-start RB2s. Maybe you have the depth where they just don't fit in the lineup if there's only one flex spot in your league. But based on the expectation we got from week 1, I think you are starting these guys no matter what. Especially in the top 15, there's no way I'm benching Travis Etienne at Cincinnati after last week. I mentioned it against the Panthers. I thought he had some very high upside, and he was a startable flex play in my rankings. But we needed to see the volume split in Jacksonville first, and it's undeniable now. He is locked in to the RB1 production. Not only did he have 17 touches, no other player had more than 6, they also traded away Tank Bigsby. Tank is now a Philadelphia Eagle. So right now, Bashal Tutin and LaQuint Allen are the only handcuffs that are relevant, and at the moment, they have no value whatsoever. Etienne is the guy you need, and while he did not score a touchdown, he played very well against Carolina, definitely earned his job. 156 total yards on 19 total touches, 16 rush attempts, 3 receptions. He was fantastic. So maybe the injuries that he dealt with last year are really what held him back. Maybe some of my preseason worries on Etienne were really misguided. At the moment, he looks like, based on ADP, a potential league winner. So maybe Bashal Tutin still emerges. Maybe the Panthers matchup was actually the only reason why he looked so good. But 17.1 points in week 1 without a touchdown is a player you have to trust moving forward. So I'm not going to put him in the top 10. I'm not going to go overboard on that. But if he does rank top 10 next week, I wouldn't be that surprised. The Bengals matchup is probably going to make him look good once again. So love Etienne, have to start him top 13 this week. You can trust him. He needs to be in your lineup in week 2. At number 14, I also think Breece Hall deserves the trust. While Braylon Allen did vulture him on the goal line, it wasn't exciting to see that. He also got vultured by Justin Fields, but it did not matter. Breece Hall was a top 10 play in fantasy in week 1. He had 19 carries. Braylon Allen and Isaiah Davis only combined for 8 total touches, and all 4 targets in this backfield did go to Breece Hall. So they're not going to be winning most games, and even when they did, they leaned on Breece heavily. So I do expect a lot of usage, especially in the passing game, going for Breece Hall. So I like what I saw. He was hyper efficient. He had 145 total yards on 21 total touches. So the explosiveness, the talent was on display. He's going to be a consistent RB2. However, the fact he didn't score a touchdown was a reason to pause. I think there is a chance that he does not have access to that ceiling consistently because the touchdowns just go to other players. I think Fields will vulture him consistently, and if Braylon Allen does not go away on the goal line, then that will definitely cap the upside. I don't think Breece Hall is ever going to be ranked in the top 10 on a week-to-week basis. But will he be top 15 pretty consistently? I think so. And against Buffalo It was a great matchup last year. It looked like another great matchup against Derrick Henry. I would upgrade Breece Hall this week. I think he's a good, safe play in week 2. Number 15, I have James Conner versus Carolina, and I will admit I'm a little reluctant to trust him after the running back by committee approach in last week's game against New Orleans. But they were winning. The Saints aren't that competitive, so maybe some of the touches for Trey Benson were game plan specific. And against the Panthers, an elite matchup from last year that looked just as good against Etienne, I'm willing to trust that you need to upgrade the RB1, whoever it is, when they go up against the Panthers. So I trust James Conner this week. I think he is a safe play, and I think odds are he does find the end zone. I think he'll be much more efficient than week 1 because he didn't look special. He had 16 total touches, 12 rush attempts, 4 targets, 4 catches. Benson had 9, and Conner was way less efficient. Conner averaged just 2.8 yards per touch. Meanwhile, Benson averaged 8.3 yards per touch. It was definitely the youth on display last week. Benson looked like the much better player, but the volume still went in favor of Conner. He also scored the touchdown, and especially in the passing game, he was the guy you needed, 4 targets to Benson's 1. So I do still trust Conner more. However, this could be a Bucky Irving, Rachaad White situation. I would definitely monitor this backfield, and there's a chance that Benson overtakes him kind of quickly, but until Conner gets hurt, I don't think that's going to happen. I would definitely roster Benson and handcuff him if I can, but for now, I still think the right play would be James Conner. So the matchup is really the main upgrade here, why I'm trusting him so much. I think he's a must-start because of that, but there are some red flags. There's a chance I'm ranking him too high after last week. It wasn't as encouraging as I would have expected, but maybe the Saints' run defense is actually legit. Maybe that's a factor as well. Number 16, I have Chuba Hubbard at Arizona, and last week I did tell you to start Chuba Hubbard. I had him ranked basically right here as well, and he did have a good fantasy game, but the touchdown came in garbage time, and his matchup was the second best in the NFL versus the running back position last year, so everything went as expected. 16 points for Chuba with a touchdown was basically what I thought would happen. So I'm happy it worked out. He did catch 3 of his 5 targets, had 99 total yards on just 19 total touches. And that touchdown does bail you out, does make you feel a little bit better about it. But still a little hesitant to like fully endorse as like a must start every week. I think the touchdown dependency is a factor here. Similar to James Conner, I think there is a chance that he could move back down the rankings pretty quickly. I think there is a chance he doesn't look as good. Against Arizona, it's definitely a much tougher matchup. So I'm willing to trust that last week's usage means Rico Dowdle is irrelevant and he's definitely locked into the most production. But I think sometimes matchups will decide how good he is versus how bad he looks. So I'm going to pump the brakes just a little bit, but I am telling you start Chuba Hubbard again. In the top 20, I think you need to do that. The floor, I think, is safe for double digits. Next up, I have J.K. Dobbins. If Denver was not a committee, I think the starter might be a weekly top 10 play at the position. There's a lot of value here in Denver. I also think the loss of Evan Ingram is going to lead to more of a reliance on this running back position in Denver until he gets back. So for now, Dobbins looks like the clear lead running back, the one you want. He had 16 carries, caught both of his two targets, and he also scored the touchdown, but only had 68 total yards. Harvey only had 7 touches, so less than half, but turned it into 69 total yards. So Harvey was way more efficient. However, Dobbins got the volume. For now, I'm definitely trusting Dobbins, but monitor Harvey's usage. If you told me it became a 50-50 committee by the end of the month, I would not be surprised at all. So while they are slow playing Harvey, Dobbins has a lot of upside. I would trust him as a top 20 option in week 2. I also think TreVeyon Henderson is a reliable start. I know week 1 wasn't special in his debut. He only put up 8 fantasy points, but without a touchdown, I think that represents his floor. With it, you would have gotten a game like Ja'Cory Croskey-Merritt over 14 points. So I'm expecting some touchdowns to hit pretty soon, especially given in week 1, TreVeyon Henderson actually had more touches than Rhamondre already. It was 11-9 in favor of TreVeyon, and most of those 11 touches came in the passing game. TreVeyon had 6 targets, 6 catches, and turned his overall 11 touches into 51 yards 4.6 yards per touch. Meanwhile, Rhamondre turned his 9 touches into 27 total yards, and that's only 3 yards per touch. So you get a 50% higher efficiency rating with Henderson. Very quickly, they will heavily favor TreVeyon. And I think this week against the Dolphins, it could immediately explode into a lot of fantasy points. I think TreVeyon's going to be on display as the best athlete on the field this week. The Dolphins look like they already quit in week 1 against the Colts, and even though this game is in Miami, I think the Patriots can easily win. I do not have any faith in the Dolphins defense stopping anyone. So I think TreVeyon's going to look really good really fast, and maybe Rhamondre has a role for another week or two, but by the time we hit October, Rhamondre will be an afterthought. TreVeyon will have a full runway. He is a buy low candidate, but based on the preseason hype, odds are no one wants to let him go. So definitely start him. I think he's a top 20 running back this week. I think 8 points as a floor is a reason to trust that he should be started. And at some point, it's going to pay off with an elite ceiling. At some point, he'll break the game open. I think it happens in week 2. Number 19, I have Tony Pollard versus the Rams. And if he did not fumble, he actually had a pretty decent game. 89 total yards on 19 touches. Only 1 target, though, and 1 reception. I expected that passing game volume to be higher. But against Denver, that's not a bad production profile at all. The fumble definitely factored in, but if he had scored a touchdown, he actually would have been tied with Kyren Williams for running back 15 on the week. Kyren had exactly 6 points more than him with a touchdown. So I do think Pollard needs to be trusted moving forward. I think the volume should carry him once again to another high floor. And if the fumble doesn't happen, as I wouldn't expect it to, then odds are he cracks 10 points against the Rams this week. But the Rams defense looked really good against the Texans. Maybe this is another spot to be fading him. But based on volume alone, I think Pollard is locked in to RB2 production. I think he's a top 20 play once again this week. At number 20, I do have Ashton Jeanty versus the Chargers, and you're probably saying this is too low on Jeanty. We drafted him in the 2nd round, but like last week, I wanted to slow play him, and he was even worse than I expected. I had him at like RB 15 last week, and he was not very good. The usage was the main takeaway, though. In week 1, he had 19 carries, 2 targets, 2 catches, but only put up 40 total yards. The efficiency was terrible. He bailed you out only because of a touchdown. So 11 points with a touchdown is nothing special at all. I would like to see him play really well before I rank him in the top 10. And until that happens, I think he's just a top 20 RB2. The matchup here versus the Chargers is a reason to fade him as well. They held the Chiefs to just 7.4 fantasy points on the game last week, and against them, they were bottom 8 against the position last year overall in fantasy as well. So not much changed on their defense. I think they're another matchup to avoid yet again, and that's why I am fading Jeanty. I would like to see him play well before I rank him in the top 12. So at number 20, I think you are going to start him, but I'm not expecting like an elite game. I think he's also touchdown dependent once again, and without it, you probably do not crack 10 fantasy points. So the efficiency needs to improve. Last week was bad. Only 40 total yards is not encouraging, but the volume is going to carry him over the line most of the time. The only threat in this backfield was Jahmyr White last week, who had 3 touches compared to Jeanty's 21. So he's locked into the volume. You have to trust that. Inevitably, it will work out, but the Chargers are probably going to hold him back just a little bit. Last player I have in this tier, though, would be Omarion Hampton, the other rookie in the same matchup at Las Vegas. I think he'll be okay, but he was not special in week 1 versus the Chiefs. However, the matchup against Kansas City was literally the toughest overall on the season last year, so I am willing to trust that this was a downgrade for him in week 1, but I'm not going to panic just because he only had 7 points against the Chiefs week 1. His usage was fine, 15 carries, 2 catches, 17 total touches, and 61 total yards, with Najee looking like an afterthought. Najee only had 2 touches on the game. So if the split is going to be 17-2 in his favor, then I'm definitely trusting Hampton as a safe floor play every week. Until he scores a touchdown, though, he's probably going to look like a mediocre flex play most of the time. But this week against the Raiders, it could definitely happen. I wouldn't be shocked at all to see him find the end zone. And after the Brazil travel, given he's a rookie, I think they might lean on him a lot more than they did in week 1. I think the environment last week was definitely a spot to trust Justin Herbert a little bit extra. They pass the ball a lot more than we were expecting. So it's Jim Harbaugh's offense. At some point, they will run the ball heavily. And this week, I think they might try to do that just to, limit the time of possession by the other team. I think Hampton will be fine. The volume will definitely be there. So that's what I would trust. The floor should be available. It'll come down to a touchdown, but based on the logic, I think we saw enough volume to trust Hampton in the lineup moving forward. If anything, he's a buy low trade candidate, not someone I would like to trade away. Next up, though, I think we are dropping down a tier, and these are definitely my flex plays, more touchdown dependent for sure. But at 22, I think the upside for Jordan Mason is definitely there this week. He had 8 points in week 1, and I think my offseason take on Mason was wrong. He looked pretty good. He had a lot more volume in the run game than Aaron Jones. And with J.J. McCarthy not gaining any trust yet, I do think this offense is going to lean on the run game. It may not look like Michigan's offense when McCarthy was their quarterback, but they're definitely not moving off of Mason. Their offensive line is pretty good, and I think they will lean into that strength most of the time. So especially as Aaron Jones gets older and more banged up, Mason has some elite upside if he can have this backfield all to himself. But in week 1, he was the RB1 already, 15 carries to Jones's 8. The overall touch split was 16-11 in favor of Jordan Mason. So I trust that type of floor on the goal line. He'll probably dominate those snaps as well. I think the touchdown upside's decent, but without it, you may not crack 10 points. Just like last week, maybe an 8-point floor is what you can expect from Mason moving forward. I also have Aaron Jones right behind him. I think he's also a good flex play, and he outscored Mason 14.2-8, but the touchdown was very relevant. Aaron Jones needed all the volume in the passing game he could get, and that's going to be the skill set he has on display. Mason does not offer much in the passing game, so Aaron Jones is not going to disappear. Until he gets healthy, I would expect his role to continue at this high rate. So I trust Aaron Jones as well. The touchdown will flip between the two. So back to back, I have both Vikings running backs in the top 25. Mason and Aaron Jones in prime time on Sunday night, I think should have respectable games. If you do find the end zone, you'll probably crack the top 20 on the week with that player. So good luck choosing the right one. It could be both, it could be neither, but I think odds are one of them will find the end zone every week. At 24 and 25, I have another running back by committee. This time in Seattle, we have Kenneth Walker, followed by Zach Charbonnet at 24 and 25. The matchup against Pittsburgh is not the main concern. The 50-50 committee is why Kenneth Walker is nowhere near as safe as I would have thought. So last week, my worst call was ranking Kenneth Walker top 10. He had a terrible game against San Francisco, only 3.9 points, and 1.5 of those was in the passing game. He had 3 receptions. That's the only reason to feel excited about Kenneth Walker, because that was the only thing he had in favor of Charbonnet last week. All 3 running back targets went to Walker. None of them went to Charbonnet. But in the run game, Charbonnet had 12 carries and Walker only had 10. So this was a 13-12 overall touch split, and Charbonnet had the touchdown. Charbonnet was also way more efficient, had 47 total yards. Walker only had 24 against the 49ers. So Walker looks bad. Charbonnet looks like he may overtake him. And perhaps right now I am ranking them incorrectly. Perhaps Charbonnet should be ranked higher. But I'm going to put them back to back. Walker I still think is slightly more talented, but that's not a convincing argument to make anymore. So there's a chance that Charbonnet is the league-winning option. But if it's a 50-50 split like it was last week, 52-48, then neither may have like elite value any week. It may only be relevant once one of them gets hurt. And Walker has the main injury risk of these two players. So this is a major red flag. Walker, I think, is just a flex play right now. I need to see him dominate the usage over Charbonnet in order to trust him back in the top 15. And it's looking like that's never going to happen if Charbonnet's usage from week 1 is legit. So I would be panicked on Walker. I'd be very happy if I drafted Charbonnet, and we'll see what happens on the road. The only reason I think they have a good floor is because the Seahawks did not trust Darnold to throw the ball. Darnold only had 23 pass attempts. Meanwhile, there were 22 rush attempts from this backfield. So I think they'll be okay, but the touchdown will really be critical. There's a chance neither has value because they just eat into each other's upside so much. So good luck, hyper touchdown dependent, just flex plays this week. We need to see this backfield pan out a little bit more before we trust one overwhelmingly. Next up at 26, I have David Montgomery versus Chicago, and I might be ranking him too low, but at 26, this is where I had him entering the season, and against Chicago, this is probably a much better matchup than the Packers matchup was. So I think he'll be way more efficient. However, the volume did favor Gibbs, not overwhelmingly though. Gibbs had 19 overall touches, Montgomery had 15, but 10 of them were in the passing game for Gibbs, only 4 of them for Montgomery, and the game script definitely favored throwing the ball. So while I do think they want to lean on their run-first identity again and maybe limit some of the exposure to Goff without Ben Johnson, he did not look very good, I'm not convinced that Montgomery is just going to be amazing all of a sudden against his former team. So maybe the revenge game factors in, but only 6.3 points with 4 receptions in week 1. There's a chance that their offensive line is also really bad compared to last year, but I'm mainly willing to take away that the Packers are a nightmare matchup, not that Montgomery is washed. I think both Lions running backs are going to bounce back pretty quickly. So he could still vulture a lot of touchdowns. I think Montgomery's still in the flex conversation, but last week was not encouraging. I think I'd rather go with either Vikings running back or either Seahawks running back over Montgomery this week, but I might still have him like 5 spots too low. There's a chance he's more valuable than Mason, Jones, Walker, and Charbonnet. I would not rank him, though, above Hampton. He's definitely just in flex consideration, not top 20 at the position. At 27, I might be ranking Dylan Sampson too low. Last week was phenomenal. He had 13.3 points without a touchdown, but I think part of that was the matchup against the Bengals. I would like to see it happen one more time, and the Ravens will be a tough test here. So I don't trust him fully, but he did catch all 8 of his targets, had way more usage than Jerome Ford, and it's pretty clear he is the RB to own in Cleveland, at least until Judkins comes back to the field. So right now, Judkins did sign his contract, but is not going to play in week 2. So Sampson gets the green light. I think he's a solid flex play, and I might be ranking him legitimately too low. In full PPR, I'd probably have him at the top of this tier. 8 targets is probably not going to go away. They're definitely going to be trailing most of the time this season. So Sampson looks legit. In full PPR, I think he's a must start, but in half PPR, I'd like to see it one more time before I believe in him. The Bengals matchup, I think, is why he looks so good. The Ravens could lock him up, but maybe they don't. Maybe he looks amazing. Maybe he's a top 20 play starting next week. At 28, I have Javonte Williams versus the Giants, and this is the last player I have in this tier. Javonte looked good in week 1. He had 19.4 points. However, there were several factors in his favor. Jalen Carter was ejected. The Cowboys had all summer to prepare, and they're very familiar with their in-division rival, the Eagles. So as good as he was, I don't believe that 2 touchdowns are going to repeat every single time. If he scores less than 8 touchdowns on the season, I wouldn't be that shocked for Javonte. But for now, he's the guy to trust. Sanders fumbled and wasn't really a threat in the first place. So with Jaden Blue inactive, Javonte is locked into RB1 usage in Dallas. So that is relevant. That is a interesting flex play, but without the touchdowns, you would have only had 7.4 points from Javonte. That's not elite by any stretch of the imagination. So while he was a top 5 option last week, I doubt that ever happens again, and I'm not dying to start him. But at 28, you can definitely make an argument he should be in the lineup. Moving on, the next tier is officially where I'm starting to bench all of these players. If you have to start them, I get it. Maybe you have limited depth, but I'm really worried about their upside this week. I don't think any of them are going to go over 10 points. At 29, I have DeAndre Swift at the Detroit Lions, and just like last week, I think he'll probably be capped at around 8 points. He had an overwhelming usage rate in Chicago week 1. 20 touches, and the next closest option was Kyle Monangai with only 1 touch. There is no doubt about it. Swift is the guy in Chicago. So that's going to carry him to a very high floor every week. If you think I'm ranking him too low, I understand. But on that volume, he only had 65 total yards and no touchdown, only 8 points versus the Vikings. And last year, the Vikings were a bottom 3 matchup against the position, so maybe that's a big reason why he was pretty inefficient. But this week he gets Detroit, and last year they were a bottom 5 matchup against the running back position. So again, I don't think it's a good matchup to face, and for that reason, I would like to fade him. Last week, Josh Jacobs only had 70 total yards himself on 20 touches and also scored a touchdown. So I don't view Swift the same way I see Jacobs, especially on the goal line. I don't think that touchdown is a guarantee. And based on the usage in Chicago week 1, I also didn't feel like they prioritized Swift in the red zone either. So I'm not dying to trust Swift right now. I think the matchup is a concern, but from a floor standpoint, the volume will provide top 30 value. I just think against Detroit, I would like to fade him. I don't think he finds the end zone. So that's why I'm benching Swift, but if you have to, you probably get a decent floor out of it. At 30, I also think you get a decent usable floor out of Alvin Kamara. But last week was a major red flag for me. Although he did score a rushing touchdown, that completely bailed him out. He was pretty bad without it. Only 11 carries. Kendre Miller had 5. Devin Neal also had 2. So there's a bit of a committee going on. And it's not like he was heavily targeted either. Only 2 running back targets on the game out of New Orleans. Both of them went to Kamara, but still, that's not what we expected. We thought he would get like 5+ targets after last year's usage. So Kellen Moore just doesn't use the position that way, and it's really going to cap his volume. As Kamara gets older, the injury risk increases, and the weeks are going to go by with bad matchups. I don't think Kamara is going to be good. And last week, Kenneth Walker and Charbonnet were not very effective against the Niners either. So this week, I don't think he's a good start. Not a must start at all. At RB30, I would hit the panic button. If I can trade Kamara away for really anyone I rank higher, I think I would do it. Maybe not Dylan Sampson, but honestly, I wouldn't feel that good about Alvin Kamara. If you can get RJ Harvey for him, hell yeah, I'd do that in a heartbeat. But I do have Harvey ranked 1 spot behind Kamara at 31, and Harvey's volume just wasn't quite there. While he was very efficient, he actually had more yards than J.K. Dobbins, 69 total. Only 7 total touches, and that efficiency, 10 yards per touch, is probably not going to repeat. So I'm going to trust that Dobbins is the only safe play in Denver right now. There's a chance that Harvey quickly emerges in like a 50-50 committee, but until I see that, I just can't trust the volume. Only 7 touches is pretty brutal, so I'm not going to start him if I don't have to. I would much rather have Dobbins in the lineup than Harvey, but there is still some upside. There's always a chance for a touchdown or just a massive play when you play for Sean Payton and the Broncos. So not irrelevant, but not a start this week. Outside the top 30, I got RJ Harvey as a bench stash in week 2. At number 32 and 33, I have Ekeler and JCM of the Commanders. And Ekeler is actually questionable. He was limited in practice earlier today. They play on Thursday, so I'm not that worried. He's a veteran. And he did not exit the game with a injury tag in the first place. So I think Ekeler is going to be the better play this week because the matchup is extremely difficult against Green Bay. They limited the Lions to just 2.2 yards per carry last week. And the Lions backfield needed to rely on the passing game heavily. They had 14 targets, 14 catches combined between Gibbs and David Montgomery last week. So I think the pass-catching running back in Washington is going to be the better play. I don't think they're going to be efficient on the ground at all. And last week, if you remove the touchdown from the equation, JCM only would have outscored Ekeler by 1 point. JCM had 10 rush attempts for 82 yards and a touchdown. Meanwhile, Ekeler had 3 receptions and 57 total yards. So they were actually kind of close. The touchdown just put Bill over the top. And this week, I don't think a touchdown is going to be available for either of them. I think the Packers is a major matchup to fade. The way they locked up Detroit, I think, is legit. So I'm not trying to start either Commanders running back this week. If one of them really emerges and has a great game, I think it would be Ekeler only because of the passing game usage. JCM had 1 target and did not catch it in week 1. So that is why I'm fading both of them. The matchup is a nightmare. And I also think it's enough of a committee to still not feel like amazing about starting any of them. Without a touchdown, I don't think you're cracking 10 points with either player because they did not have this backfield just to themselves. There was also Jeremy McNichols involved, and while JCM did see the most volume, his touches only account for 44% of the overall backfield split. So less than half in line for JCM. Against the Packers, I don't feel great about it. I think the pass catching PPR value is the only thing that's going to keep one of these guys afloat. And in my opinion, that job is still firmly in line with Austin Ekeler. So I could be wrong. I wouldn't be surprised if JCM emerges over the coming month, but in week 2, I still think the veteran has some cachet, and last week the game script did not benefit throwing the ball at all. So this week I think it will. I think Ekeler will be more involved than last week, and that's why if I'm starting one, give me Ekeler. But against the Packers, I want to bench both of them. I'm also going to bench Jaylen Warren versus Seattle. He scored a touchdown and didn't go over 13 fantasy points. He was fine, but nothing special, and it's nice to see him find the end zone. Last year, he only had one touchdown, but even with the touchdown, capped to less than 13 points in half PPR is pretty mediocre. So Warren, I think, hit his ceiling last week. He had 59 total yards on 13 touches. The touchdown is the only thing that bailed him out. And this is still a relative committee in Pittsburgh. While Caleb Johnson was irrelevant, Kenny Gainwell actually had 10 touches. So despite the clear RB1 in Pittsburgh, that's not an overwhelming touch split in his favor. It's only 55% of the backfield, and then there's always the chance that Caleb Johnson starts to emerge more and more as the weeks go by. So I'm not dying to start Warren. I think he needs a touchdown to crack 10 points, and if you have to start him just based on depth, you are not getting an elite option by any stretch of the imagination. You need the touchdown to bail you out. So the matchup is not ideal. Seattle scares me a bit, and that's why I will fade Jaylen Warren outside my top 30 in week 2. Number 35, the last player in this tier who I think can still provide you with like 6, 7, maybe 8 points is Trey Benson versus Carolina. And the main reason I'm trusting Benson is because of the matchup. The Panthers were the worst run defense last year, the best matchup in fantasy for all running backs in 2024, and then they just got torched. They gave up 156 total yards to Travis Etienne in week 1. So I think that could continue. I think there is some chance for a big play here. And last week, James Conner was way less efficient than Benson. Benson averaged 8.6 yards per carry, had 75 total yards on just 9 total touches, and James Conner only had 3.2 yards per carry. So if the youth is going to win out, it's going to be on display pretty consistently. Benson is the more explosive player, but earlier in the year, I would still expect Conner to have a bit of a stranglehold on the backfield. So I'm not dying to trust him, but if you have to, he's an interesting DFS play. In a super deep league, maybe he cracks your lineup, but with no injuries at the position, odds are no one's going to do that. So I think he can crack 8 points again. That's what he did last week, but only because of the matchup. That's the only reason I have to be excited. Beyond this point, I think everyone is a must bench, and Tyrone Tracy, while he is a starting NFL running back, didn't prove much last week, only 4.5 points. The Giants offense looked like shit. So I'm not excited. While Scattaboo was kind of an afterthought, only 4 touches for Scattaboo. Tracy had 12 on the day, only 35 yards. Nothing special. He was kind of dominant in the receiving game. 5 targets for Tracy, only 2 for Scattaboo. And then Singletary did have 3 carries as well. But in general, this is the same argument as a guy like Jaylen Warren. Even with decent volume, you are very reliant on a touchdown in order to be relevant in fantasy. So no thanks. The Cowboys looked pretty good against the Eagles run game. And I think Tyrone Tracy is a big fade this week with Russell Wilson at quarterback. Next up at 37, I have Nick Chubb versus Tampa Bay, and Chubb had 60 yards on 13 carries. So not bad from a yards per carry standpoint, but it's not enough volume to be relevant in fantasy. Without a touchdown, you're not going to crack 10 points for sure. And then there was also no passing game usage whatsoever. So even with 60 yards, Chubb maxed out at 6 points. And against Tampa Bay, it's a very rough matchup. Vita Vea not going to let Chubb run all over them. So Chubb is a big fade. Without a touchdown, he'll be unstartable all year. At 38 and 39, I think the Chiefs' backfield is also unstartable. We had a 50-50 split last week between Pacheco and Kareem Hunt, and neither had more than 10 touches. So even if they score a touchdown, what are you going to get? Based on last week, it would have maxed out at less than 10 points if either of them found the end zone. So to bet right is going to be a gamble. It's a coin flip on who gets those goal line carries. And in general, I don't want to be starting either of them. I think Mahomes is going to be their leading rusher this season. So not going to trust Pacheco or Kareem Hunt. Maybe Brashard Smith emerges as the season goes on. Right now, I want nothing to do with this backfield. But the Chargers matchup was tough. I will acknowledge that. But the Eagles get Jalen Carter back. Last year, that was an elite run defense. I don't think it's an upgrade at all. In week 2, not a good spot to be in. At 40, I have Rhamondre Stevenson at Miami, and the touch split already favored TreVeyon in week 1, so not excited here with Rhamondre. The only optimism I have is that the Dolphins are that bad, and maybe they just give up so many points to the Patriots that a touchdown falls in the lap of Stevenson and you get bailed out. But last week, less than 4 points as well. Not going to trust him. TreVeyon is the guy to own in New England. Next up at 41, I have Bijan Robinson Jr. at New Orleans, and this offense is very banged up, so they will be hyper-reliant on the running back position, and not everything can go to Christian McCaffrey. So even though CMC is my RB1, last week Bijan Robinson had 9 carries, 1 reception in his debut for the Niners, and against New Orleans, with a backup quarterback, I would expect them to lean on the run game yet again. So maybe some garbage time production. B-Rob is also touchdown dependent, but against New Orleans, maybe it works out. The backup Trey Benson did have 8 fantasy points against the Saints last week. At 42, the last player I would even consider if I was hyper desperate would be Tyler Algier. Algier had 10 carries last week. However, he got not a single target in the passing game. So with no PPR value, you're pretty dependent on a touchdown and high efficiency. Against Minnesota, it's not the matchup I want to be chasing. So no thanks with Algier. He's relevant just to rank. You can't drop him, but he's just a handcuff. No real upside without a touchdown in this backfield, but 10 carries is somewhat relevant. Wanted to mention it. Beyond this point, I'm just ranking them for the sake of letting you know that they should be rostered on your bench. If they're available on the waiver wire, you need to scoop up these players. They do have some contingent value, but at 43, we have Braylon Allen versus Buffalo, scored a touchdown, but only 9 total yards on 6 carries. The vulture appeal is the only upside for him at this point, so no thank you. Cam Scatterbo was pretty irrelevant in week 1, only 4 total touches, less than 2 points. Need to see him overtake Tracy in order to consider starting him, but you need to roster Scatterbo. At some point, I think it will happen. At 45, we got Rico Dowdle at Arizona. Dowdle had 3 targets, but only 3 carries. It's still Chuba's job, but handcuff value is still relevant. At 46, we have Miles Sanders versus the Giants, and Sanders did fumble, but also had 1 explosive big play. He probably lost his job, and maybe Jaden Blue does actually play at some point this year, but for now, Javonte's the only guy to trust. Sanders might not be completely irrelevant, but needs a big play and a touchdown. In order to do that, not going to trust him just yet. If you wanted to drop him for Jaden Blue, I would consider it. Maybe Sanders is not valuable at all. At 47, I got Rachaad White at Houston. Coming off the groin injury, he had very little usage, only 2 total touches. And right now, while I wouldn't cut him, I can only trust Bucky in this backfield. I also think Justice Hill has some potential garbage time usage, but he was really bad in week 1. Negative rushing yards. That's pretty brutal. So maybe Keaton Mitchell is the handcuff to own, but I'll give Justice Hill just 1 more week of runway on the radar to be rostered. At 49, we have Ray Davis, who is also irrelevant, but still has handcuff appeal. Ty Johnson actually was more involved, but I do think Ray Davis is more talented than Ty Johnson. So not going to cut him, but definitely considered it. And then lastly, last player ranked would be Baishal Tutin at 50 at the Bengals. He will be the number 2 backup, and there were 5 rush attempts going to Bigsby last week that are now up for grabs. So maybe they go to Etienne, maybe they go to Tutin. We have to wait and see. But in terms of handcuff appeal, the backfield got much less crowded in Jacksonville, and now Tutin is the clear handcuff to own behind Etienne. But Etienne is clearly the guy you need. There's a chance there is no value whatsoever with Baishal Tutin this year. So those are my running back rankings in week 2. I think the top 5 are the guys that you would expect to go over 20 points, but the top 12 are the players locked into your lineup. I would expect at least 13 plus from all of them. A touchdown is probably guaranteed. If not, they're going to come close to 100 total yards. And then 13 through 21, I think, are the safe running back twos. I'd feel a lot more confident with guys like Etienne, Breece Hall, and then some matchups for Connor and Hubbard are really interesting. But I still think the potential to explode for guys like Dobbins, TreVeyon, Pollard, Jeanty, and Hampton are definitely there. If they score a touchdown, expect similar upside. And the floor, I think, will be safe for at least like 8 or so points. The volume is locked in for all of them. So those are the starting running backs, I think, across the board this week, the top 21. And then once we hit Jordan Mason through Javonte Williams, that I think is the flex territory where I may not guarantee 10 plus points, but they're definitely worth starting if you don't have good depth, but maybe you don't have the space to fit them into the lineup. I think they're a little too touchdown dependent for me to guarantee top 20 numbers for all of them. So that is the cutoff point. Javonte Williams at RB28. After him starting with Swift at 29, I would be benching pretty much every single option. If you have to, then go ahead, but I worry about the matchups for guys like Swift, Kamara, especially the Commanders' backfield against Green Bay, and then I'm worried that the volume is just too low on guys like Warren and RJ Harvey for them to not be touchdown dependent. Without it, you probably don't go over 7 or 8 points. So good luck there. There's a chance that Benson pops in a great matchup, but that's the last guy I would really consider at all. But in general, once we hit Tyrone Tracy at RB36, only in super deep formats would you even consider it, and I think you're kind of destined to lose beyond Jaylen Warren at 34. Guys like Tyrone Tracy, Nick Chubb just have no value without a touchdown, and then some of the committees are pretty gross and ugly beyond that point. The Chiefs' backfield looks disgusting. So that's it for this video. If you enjoyed, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. I will see you tomorrow with wide receiver rankings, and I'm going to try to go live tonight and do some waiver wire content. I'll maybe take you through my waiver wire priority on the live stream tonight with your waiver claims set to go through in the morning. So that's it for me. My name's Adam Riancho. I'll see you next time. Thank you for watching. Nice and blunt.